The world went white. The explosion hit like a fist to her chest. For a heartbeat, Betha Eze forgot how to breathe. The entire restaurant trembled. Dishes flew off shelves, lights swung wildly, and the air filled with the sharp tang of smoke and shattered glass. Somewhere beyond the ringing in her ears, Jia was screaming, her voice warped and distant, like it was trapped underwater. Fire! Bethany! Fire outside! Betha stumbled forward, every movement thick with disbelief. Through the restaurant's window, Seoul's winter night was burning. Orange flames clawed at the sky 2 buildings down, devouring the darkness, turning snowflakes into gray ash that rained over Mapogu. The world outside looked like it was ending, and maybe, for her, it was. Before this night, she thought she built a quiet life, just a restaurant, a dream, a second chance. But the fire, welcome to Afro-Korean storytelling, my love. This is our very first video, and if you're already hooked, show your support by hitting that subscribe button. It would mean the world to me. The snow fell like ash that night. Betha Eze bent over the cutting board, her knife moving in smooth, practiced arcs through the ginger root. The scent rose sharp and clean, cutting through the heavier smells of palm oil and garlic that clung to every corner of Eze table. Outside, Seoul wore its winter like a shroud. Gray buildings, grayer sky, and people bundled so tight you couldn't tell the living from the mannequins in shop windows. She wiped her hands on her apron and glanced toward the dining area. 3 tables occupied. Not bad for a Wednesday in Mapogu, where most people walked past her restaurant without a second look. The sign above the door, hand-painted in her own unsteady Korean characters, promised Afro-Korean fusion, but what it really offered was her refusal to forget where she came from, while learning to belong where she stood. Betha Unni, the jollof is almost gone, Min Jia called from the front, her voice bright despite the late hour. The girl was 19, a university dropout who showed up 6 months ago, asking for work and never left. She had that kind of loyalty you didn't find often, the type that made Betha wonder what Jia was running from. There's more in the back pot. And stop calling it jollof when customers ask. Say it's spicy tomato rice. They get nervous when they can't pronounce things. Jia laughed, that tinkling sound that always seemed too innocent for the neighborhood they worked in. But it tastes better when you call it jollof. Betha shook her head, fighting a smile. The girl wasn't wrong. The kitchen timer beeped. Betha moved to pull the suya-spiced short ribs from the oven, the meat falling off the bone just the way it should. Heat rushed out and kissed her face, carrying with it the smell of charred spices and caramelized fat. She plated 3 orders with practiced speed. Rice here, kimchi there. A drizzle of her grandmother's pepper sauce that she'd spent 2 years perfecting with gochugaru instead of the peppers from home. Each plate was a small act of translation, a conversation between Lagos and Seoul that she was still learning to speak fluently. Fusion wasn't about mixing things randomly. It was about making 2 worlds sit at the same table without killing each other. She pushed through the kitchen door with the plates balanced along her arm. The couple at table 2 looked up with that expression she'd learned to read, cautious hope that the foreign woman's food wouldn't disappoint them. The businessman in the corner didn't look up at all, too focused on his phone and his soju. His tie was loosened, jacket draped over the chair behind him. Another salaryman drinking away the day's failures or tomorrow's fears. Enjoy, she said in Korean that still filled thick in her mouth after 3 years. The couple smiled. Small victories. Betha returned to the kitchen and started on prep for tomorrow. Her hands moved through familiar rhythms, chopping scallions, mixing marinades, portioning rice. This was meditation for her, the only time her mind went quiet. Back in Lagos, her mother used to say cooking was prayer, You put your intentions into the food, and the food carried them to whoever ate it. Betha didn't know if she believed that anymore, but she cooked like she did, just in case. The radio on the shelf played some ballad she didn't understand, all soaring vocals and dramatic strings. Korean music always sounded like it was reaching for something just beyond its grasp. She related to that, more than she cared to admit. Jia appeared in the doorway, wiping down a tray. The couple wants to know if you make the pepper sauce yourself. Tell them yes. They want to buy a bottle. Betha paused, knife hovering over the cutting board. She'd thought about selling the sauce before, but it felt too personal somehow, like selling pieces of her grandmother's memory. Tell them I'll think about it, she said finally. Jia grinned like she'd won something and disappeared back into the dining room. The world went white. The explosion hit like a fist to the chest, stealing the air from Betha's lungs. The building shook violently, as if something beneath the earth had woken up angry. Dishes launched themselves from the drying rack and shattered across the floor in a spray of ceramic shrapnel. The overhead lights swung wildly, casting shadows that lurched and twisted. Betha grabbed the counter to keep from falling, her ears ringing so loud she couldn't hear Ji-ah screaming until the girl appeared in the kitchen doorway, eyes stretched wide with terror, mouth moving in words that sounded underwater. Fire! Betha Ani, fire outside! Betha shoved past her into the dining room. The customers were already gone, the door hanging open, cold air rushing in with flakes of snow that didn't look like snow anymore. They looked gray, contaminated, wrong. Through the window, she could see it. Orange flames clawing at the night sky 2 buildings down, hungry and violent. The old warehouse that nobody used, the one the landlord kept promising to demolish. Black smoke poured upward in thick columns that blotted out the stars, and even from here, she could feel the heat pressing against the glass, like a living thing trying to get in. People spilled into the street, shouting, pointing, pulling out phones to record what they should have been running from. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer with each second. We need to leave, Jia said, tugging at Betha's sleeve with trembling fingers. What if it spreads? What if... But Betha couldn't move. Something felt wrong beyond the obvious wrongness of an explosion in their neighborhood. She'd walked past that warehouse 1,000 times on her way to the market, past its rusted gates and broken windows. It was empty, dead. A corpse of a building waiting for demolition. What was there to explode? The question sat in her stomach like spoiled food. The sirens grew deafening. Fire trucks screamed past, their red lights painting the snow in shades of emergency. Police cars followed, and then ambulances. The whole parade of disaster response that looked the same in every city, every country. Betha finally let Jia pull her outside, where they stood with the other shop owners and residents. Everyone watching the firefighters battle the flames with water that turned to steam before it could do much good. The heat was incredible, even from this distance. Betha could taste it in the air, bitter chemicals and burning metal. Nothing natural about it. This wasn't a simple fire. This was destruction with purpose. Gas leak, maybe, someone muttered in Korean behind her. Homeless people cooking inside, another voice suggested, and Betha wanted to turn around and ask them why they always blamed the homeless for everything bad that happened in this city. She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly aware she'd left her coat inside. The cold bit through her thin sweater, needle-sharp against her skin, but she barely felt it. She kept staring at the fire, at the way it consumed everything with such hunger, such completeness. There was something almost beautiful about it, the way destruction could be. Something hypnotic. A hand touched her shoulder, and she spun around, heart hammering against her ribs. A police officer stood there, young, with a face that hadn't yet learned to hide its emotions. He looked apologetic. "You own the restaurant?" he asked in Korean, nodding toward an easy table. "Yes, why?" "We need you to come with us. Just some questions." The words were polite, but they landed like stones. Questions about what? I was cooking. I don't know anything about the fire. The officer's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes shifted. Pity, maybe, or suspicion. The two looked similar in fluorescent light. Please, it's procedure. Procedure for what? Betha heard her voice rising and forced it back down. Getting angry with cops never ended well, no matter what country you were in. Gia stepped closer. Protective despite being half Betha's size. She didn't do anything. Nobody said she did. The officer's voice stayed polite, professional, but his hand remained on Betha's shoulder. Not quite gripping, but not quite letting go either. Just routine questions for all the business owners nearby. Betha looked back at her restaurant. The lights were still on, warm and inviting against the chaos of the street. She'd built that. Scraped together every one. Fought with suppliers who didn't want to deal with a foreign woman. Learned to cook Korean ingredients the way her mother had taught her to cook Nigerian ones. With love and defiance in equal measure. The thought of leaving it unattended, vulnerable, made her chest tight. "Let me lock up first," she said. The officer hesitated, exchanged a glance with his partner who'd been standing silent nearby, then nodded. Inside, Betha moved quickly, turning off equipment with practiced efficiency. Gas burners off, oven off, refrigerator checked. She grabbed the cash from the register. Not much, but enough to hurt if someone broke in, and stuffed it in her pocket. Gia followed her like a shadow, neither of them speaking. The silence felt heavier than the explosion had, weighted with all the things they weren't saying. "Go home," Betha finally said, checking that the back door was bolted. "I'll handle this. But Unni, Gia." She turned to face the girl, forcing her voice steady, even though her hands wanted to shake. "Go home. Come back tomorrow. Everything will be fine." The lie tasted bitter on her tongue, metallic and wrong. But Gia was too young to carry whatever weight was coming. The girl's eyes filled with tears she was too proud to shed. She nodded slowly, grabbed her bag from the hook by the door, and slipped out the back entrance into the alley. Betha watched her go, then locked the door behind her. She stood alone in her kitchen for a moment, breathing in the familiar smells that had become more home than any apartment ever could. Ginger and garlic, palm oil and gochugaru. The ghost of 1,000 meals cooked with her grandmother's recipes and her own stubborn modifications. If this was the last time she stood here, she wanted to remember it exactly as it was. The officer knocked on the front door. Time to go. Betha locked up, pocketed her keys, and followed him to the patrol car. She'd been in Korea long enough to know that routine questions could mean anything from 5 minutes to 5 hours, from casual chat to something that ended with handcuffs. The patrol car turned a corner, and the fire disappeared from view. But the sick feeling in Betha's gut only grew stronger, spreading through her chest like poison. At the station, they put her in a small room that smelled like instant coffee, stale cigarettes, and fear. The walls were that particular shade of institutional beige that existed only in government buildings, designed to drain hope from anyone who looked at it too long. The officer who'd brought her in disappeared, replaced by a detective who looked like he hadn't slept in days. Dark circles under his eyes, shirt wrinkled, tie hanging loose around his neck like a noose he'd given up tightening. He sat across from her with a folder that seemed too thick for routine questions. "Miss Eze," he began, butchering her last name the way everyone did. Ez instead of Eze, flattening all the music out of it. "Eze," she corrected, though she knew it wouldn't stick. He didn't acknowledge the correction. "Do you know anything about the warehouse on Dongmak Row?" "Just that it exploded tonight. Before tonight." She met his eyes, refusing to look away, even though every instinct told her to be smaller, quieter, less visible. "I walk past it sometimes. It's empty." "You've never been inside?" Why would I? The detective opened his folder with deliberate slowness and slid a photograph across the table. The plastic surface was scratched and stained with old coffee rings. Betha's breath caught in her throat, sharp and painful. It was an invoice, identical to the one she'd found under her door. Her restaurant's name, printed at the top in clean, professional font. A list of items she'd never ordered. Industrial equipment, chemicals she couldn't even pronounce. Things that had nothing to do with cooking, and everything to do with the kind of business that happened in shadows. And at the bottom, a signature that looked almost like hers but wasn't quite right. The B was too sharp, the loop in the E too wide. This was recovered from the warehouse, the detective said, watching her face carefully, along with several other documents linking your restaurant to the storage of hazardous materials. Care to explain? The room tilted. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, suddenly too bright, too loud. Betha gripped the edge of the table, forcing the world to steady itself beneath her. "That's not my signature," she said, and her voice came out harder than she intended, edged with an anger that surprised even her. "I never ordered any of this. I run a restaurant. I cook food. Rice and meat and vegetables. That's all. So someone is using your business to—" "I don't know." The words came out sharp enough to cut. "I don't know who, I don't know why, but I didn't do this. I've never even been inside that warehouse." The detective studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. She'd seen that look before, on the faces of immigration officers and landlords and bank managers. The look that said, "I don't know if I believe you, but I don't have enough to prove otherwise." Yet. Then he closed the folder and stood, chair scraping against the floor. "Don't leave Seoul," he said, and the words sounded more like a threat than advice. "We'll be in touch." That was it. No more questions. No explanation. Just that warning, hanging in the air like smoke. They let her go near midnight. Betha walked out of the station into snow that had turned the city clean and white, covering all the dirt and secrets underneath with a blanket of false purity. The temperature had dropped further. Her breath came out in clouds that dissipated almost immediately, there and gone, there and gone. She should call someone. Her brother back in Lagos, maybe, though what could a Mecca do from across the ocean except worry? Her supplier who spoke enough English to understand her panic? But it was past midnight, and what would she even say? That someone was framing her for a crime she didn't understand? Instead, she walked. Her feet carried her back toward Mapo-gu without conscious thought, past shuttered shops and sleeping buildings, through streets that looked different under snow, cleaner, kinder. She passed a convenience store still open, fluorescent lights spilling out onto the sidewalk. A couple stumbled past, drunk and happy, leaning into each other against the cold. Normal people living normal lives, unaware that someone's world had just detonated a few blocks away. Betha found herself standing in front of Easy Table, again, without remembering the last 10 minutes of walking. Her toes were numb inside her shoes. Her fingers ached from being clenched into fists. The lights were off now. Her restaurant looked small in the darkness, fragile in a way it never did during business hours, when it was full of heat and noise and the smell of food that made people stop walking past. Now it just looked like what it was, the tiny dream built on borrowed money and stubbornness, vulnerable to anyone who wanted to crush it. A car pulled up behind her, engine purring, expensive and low. Betha didn't turn around. She knew the sound of money, the way it moved through the world with absolute confidence, never apologizing for the space it took up. A door opened. Footsteps crunched through the snow, deliberate and unhurried. The sound of someone who'd never had to rush for anything because the world bent itself around his schedule. "Betha Easy," a voice said. Male, Korean, with an accent that suggested private schools and old wealth. The kind of education that cost more per year than most people made in a lifetime. We need to talk. She turned slowly, deliberately, refusing to give him the satisfaction of startling her. The man standing before her wore a black coat that probably cost more than her monthly rent. Cashmere, by the look of it, tailored perfectly to his frame. Tall, sharp-featured, with eyes that reflected the streetlight like polished stone or ice. He was younger than she'd expected, maybe early 30s, but carried himself with the wariness of someone much older, someone who'd seen things that couldn't be unseen and had stopped trying to forget them. Two men flanked him, silent and watching. Bodyguards, obviously. The expensive kind, who looked like they could kill you 6 different ways before you hit the ground, all without creasing their suits. "Who are you?" Betha asked, though some part of her already knew the answer. Knew it in the way fear knows danger before the mind catches up, in the way prey recognizes a predator, even without seeing its teeth. The man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Those stayed cold, calculating, measuring her like she was a problem he hadn't decided how to solve yet. "Kang Jae-rin, and you've been cooking with my ingredients." Behind him, the snow continued to fall, soft and relentless. The city slept on, oblivious to the fact that Betha Easy's life had just split into before and after. But Betha was wide awake now, every nerve in her body screaming at her to run, even as her feet stayed planted on the frozen sidewalk. She stared at the man who would either save her or destroy her, unable to tell which side of that knife she was standing on. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, even as her hands curled into fists at her sides, nails biting into her palms. Jae-rin tilted his head, studying her like she was a puzzle he hadn't decided whether to solve or discard. There was something almost clinical in his gaze, detached and thorough. "Then we have a lot to discuss. Get in the car, Miss Easy." "I'm not going anywhere with you." "You will," he said, and it wasn't a threat, but a simple statement of fact, delivered with the confidence of someone who'd never been told no in his life. "Because whoever set that fire used your name, and when the police finish their investigation, they won't care about the truth. They'll care about the evidence, and all the evidence points to you. You'll be the one they arrest, the one they prosecute, the one who loses everything." He paused, letting that sink in. "Unless you help me find out who's trying to destroy us both." The word hung between them. Both. Betha looked back at her restaurant, at the hand-painted sign, and the windows she cleaned every morning, and the door that stuck unless you knew to lift it slightly while turning the key. Everything she'd built from nothing, from the ashes of the life she'd left behind in Lagos. Her mother's voice echoed in her memory. "You run toward things, Betha. Never away from them, even when you should run away." Then she looked at Kang Jae-rin, at the cold certainty in his expression, and the expensive coat and the bodyguards who hadn't moved an inch. She looked at all of that and realized the explosion hadn't just destroyed a warehouse. It had detonated her entire life, and the shrapnel was still falling. "One conversation," she said finally, hating how her voice shook on the last syllable. "Then I walk away." Jae-rin's smile sharpened into something that might have been approval. Or hunger. She couldn't tell, and that terrified her more than anything else. "Of course," he said, gesturing toward the car with one gloved hand. "Just one conversation." They both knew he was lying. The snow fell harder as Betha climbed into the back seat, the leather warm from heated seats, expensive in a way that made her cheap shoes and worn coat feel like accusations. The door closed behind her with the soft, final sound of a coffin lid sealing shut. Through the tinted window, she watched her restaurant disappear as the car pulled away, carrying her toward answers she wasn't sure she wanted to find. Jae-rin sat beside her, close enough that she could smell his cologne, something woody and subtle, the kind that didn't announce itself, but lingered in memory. He didn't speak, just watched the city slide past the windows like he owned every building, every street, every secret soul tried to keep. Maybe he did. Above them, the iron sky pressed down, heavy with secrets and smoke, and somewhere in the darkness, someone was watching, waiting, smiling at how perfectly their trap had closed around two people who thought they were too smart, too careful, too different to be caught together. The game had begun, though neither player knew all the rules yet, and in Seoul's winter night, the snow continued falling, covering evidence and truth in equal measure, burying everything that had happened and everything that was still to come under layers of white that looked pure but melted dirty. The car smelled like leather and secrets. Betha sat rigid in the back seat, her spine refusing to touch the heated cushion behind her. Comfort felt like surrender right now, and she'd learned long ago that the moment you relaxed in the presence of power was the moment it consumed you. Jae-rin sat beside her with the stillness of someone who'd mastered the art of presence without movement. He hadn't spoken since they'd pulled away from Eza table, hadn't even looked at her directly, yet she felt his attention like weight against her skin. The bodyguard driving took turns with precision that suggested military training. The other sat in the passenger seat, silent as a tombstone. Neither had introduced themselves. Neither would, Betha suspected. Men like them existed to be forgotten until they were needed. Seoul at night looked different from inside expensive cars. The city lights blurred into watercolor streaks through the tinted windows, and the people on the sidewalks seemed smaller, more distant, like they belonged to a different world entirely. Maybe they did. Maybe this was how the wealthy saw everything. Filtered, separate, consequence at arm's length. "Where are we going?" Betha asked, and hated how small her voice sounded in the cathedral silence of the vehicle. "Somewhere we can talk properly," Jae-rin replied, without turning his head. His Korean was crisp, precise, each syllable exactly where it should be. "Your restaurant has too many windows, too many eyes. My restaurant is closed," which makes it even more suspicious if lights suddenly turn on. Now he did look at her, and his eyes carried that same clinical assessment she'd seen on the street. "You're not thinking clearly. Understandable, given the circumstances, but dangerous." Betha's jaw tightened. "Don't patronize me." Something flickered across his expression. Surprise, maybe, or the ghost of amusement. "I'm not. I'm stating facts. Someone went to significant effort to connect you to my warehouse. That suggests planning, resources, and most importantly, motivation. People don't frame random restaurant owners for industrial explosions unless there's a reason." "Your warehouse," Betha repeated, catching on the possessive. "So you admit you owned it?" "I own many things in this city, most of them legally." The qualifier hung in the air, neither confirmation nor denial. "The warehouse on Dongmok Row stored equipment for one of my legitimate businesses. Construction supplies, primarily. Nothing that should have exploded with that much force." "Then what did?" Jae-rin was quiet for a moment, his gaze returning to the window. "That's what we're going to find out." The car turned into an underground parking garage, descending several levels into a structure that seemed to burrow endlessly into the earth. Concrete pillars flashed past in rhythmic intervals. The air grew colder, despite the car's heating. Finally, they stopped in a section empty of other vehicles, isolated and echoey. The bodyguards moved first, scanning the area with professional paranoia before opening Jae-rin's door. He stepped out with fluid grace, buttoning his coat against the chill. Betha followed, her cheaper shoes slapping against concrete that probably cost more per square meter than her entire kitchen. "This way," Jae-rin said, walking toward an elevator that required a keycard to summon. His bodyguards flanked them as they entered, and Betha watched the floor numbers descend rather than rise. Basement 3. Basement 4. The elevator kept going until it stopped at a level marked only with a symbol she didn't recognize. The doors opened onto a corridor that looked nothing like the parking garage above. Here, the walls were paneled in dark wood, the floor covered in carpet thick enough to swallow sound. Recessed lighting created pools of warmth at regular intervals. It felt less like a basement and more like the private quarters of an expensive hotel, the kind that didn't advertise because their clientele didn't need to search for quality. Jae-rin led her to a door at the corridor's end. Inside was an office that confirmed everything Betha had suspected about him. Minimalist furniture, each piece clearly chosen for function and statement in equal measure. A desk positioned to command the room. Bookshelves lined with volumes in Korean, English, and what looked like Chinese. A bar cart with bottles that probably cost more than her monthly liquor license. Everything was calculated to intimidate while pretending casualness. "Sit," Jae-rin said, gesturing to one of 2 chairs facing his desk. It wasn't a request. Betha remained standing. "I can hear just fine from here." His eyebrow lifted fractionally. "Suit yourself." He moved behind his desk but didn't sit either, creating a strange standoff where they both refused the vulnerability of being lower than the other. He opened a drawer and withdrew a folder, placing it on the polished surface between them. "Tell me what you know about this." He slid a document toward her. Another invoice, this one more detailed than what the police had shown her. Betha stepped closer despite herself, drawn by the need to understand what was happening to her life. The letterhead made her stomach clench. Easy table, her address, her business registration number. But the items listed were insane. Industrial chemicals, construction equipment, materials she couldn't identify, but that sounded expensive and dangerous. And at the bottom, that signature that looked almost like hers, but wasn't. Someone had studied her handwriting, practiced the loops and angles, gotten it close enough to fool anyone who wasn't her. "I've never seen this before," she said, and the words felt inadequate against the evidence staring back at her. "Well, I saw something similar. Someone slipped an invoice under my door last week. I thought it was a mistake, threw it away." "Convenient," Jae-rin observed, his tone carefully neutral. Betha's head snapped up. "You think I'm lying? I think everyone lies when they're scared. The question is whether you're lying about this specifically." He leaned forward, palms flat on the desk. "Miss Ease, I've built my business by reading people, knowing when they're bluffing, when they're desperate, when they're telling the truth even though it damns them. Right now, you're either an exceptional actress or genuinely confused. I'm inclined toward the latter, but inclination isn't certainty." "Then why am I here? Why not just let the police handle it?" "Because the police will follow evidence, and all the evidence points to you. They'll arrest you, prosecute you, and by the time you prove your innocence, if you can, your restaurant will be gone, your reputation destroyed, your visa revoked. You'll be deported back to Nigeria with nothing." He straightened, adjusting his cufflinks with deliberate precision. "And because whoever did this wants us both distracted. They want me dealing with police investigations and you in a jail cell, which means they're planning something larger." Betha processed this, trying to find the trap in his logic and coming up empty. "So what do you want from me?" "Information. You're the public face of this frame job. Someone chose your restaurant specifically. That suggests either you know something useful without realizing it, or you've crossed paths with someone who has reason to want you destroyed." Jae-rin moved around the desk, eliminating the barrier between them. "Think carefully. Any unusual customers recently? Anyone asking strange questions about your business?" Betha's mind raced backward through the past few weeks. The restaurant operated on routine, regular customers, occasional tourists, the steady rhythm of cooking and serving and cleaning. Nothing unusual, nothing that stood out, except There was a man, she said slowly, the memory crystallizing. Maybe 2 weeks ago, he came in alone, right before closing, ordered jollof rice and asked a lot of questions about where I sourced my ingredients, how I ran the business, whether I did deliveries. What did he look like? Korean, older, maybe 50s, expensive watch, cheap suit, like he wanted to look successful but couldn't quite pull it off. She closed her eyes, trying to summon more details. He had a scar above his left eyebrow, small but noticeable. Jae Rin's expression hardened. Did he give a name? No. Paid cash. Left no receipt. I remember because Jia commented on it after he left. Said he gave her weird vibes. Your waitress has good instincts. Jae Rin pulled out his phone, typed something quickly, then turned the screen toward Betha. This man? The photograph showed a middle-aged Korean man in a business suit, posing for what looked like a corporate photo. The scar above his left eyebrow was clearly visible. Yes, Betha breathed. Who is he? Duyan, one of my logistics managers, or he was. Until he disappeared 3 weeks ago with a substantial amount of money and information about my operations. Jae Rin pocketed his phone, his jaw tight with controlled anger. It seems he's been busy. The pieces started clicking together in Betha's mind, forming a picture she didn't like. He came to my restaurant to research me, to figure out if I'd be a good target for his frame job. Most likely. Your restaurant is small. You're foreign. You don't have the resources to fight back effectively. Perfect scapegoat. Jae Rin began pacing, his movements precise, despite the obvious tension. Do Hyun knows how my businesses operate, knows which warehouses store what, knows how to forge documents convincingly. And now he's using that knowledge to destroy me while making sure you take the fall. Why you? Betha asked. What did you do to him? Jae Rin stopped pacing, his back to her. For a moment he was silent, and Betha wondered if he'd answer at all. Then he spoke, his voice carefully controlled. I refused to promote him. He wanted more power, more authority, more money. I told him he wasn't ready, that his judgment was questionable. Apparently, I was right. So this is revenge. Revenge and opportunity. If I'm tied up dealing with police investigations, my competitors can move into my territory. If my warehouses are suspected of storing illegal materials, my legitimate businesses suffer. It's elegant, really. Destroy my reputation while building his own power base with my stolen resources. He turned back to face her. And your collateral damage. The casual cruelty of it hit Betha like cold water. She'd built Easy Table from nothing, poured 3 years of sweat and hope and her grandmother's recipes into those walls. And to this Do-hyun person, she was just a convenient target. Disposable. If your heart is pounding right now, hit that like button. This story is about to get dangerously personal. Jae Rin studied her for a long moment. This isn't a movie, Misses. Helping me means putting yourself in more danger, not less. Do-yeon has already proven he's willing to cause significant damage. If he realizes you're working against him, he already tried to destroy my life. How much worse can it get? She stepped closer, closing the distance until they were nearly at eye level. You need someone Do-yeon doesn't know is involved. Someone who can move around without attracting attention. I'm perfect for that. You're a chef, not an investigator. I'm a foreign woman running a small business in a country that doesn't always want me here. I've learned to be invisible when I need to be and loud when it matters. Don't underestimate me because I cook for a living. Something shifted in Jae Rin's expression. Respect, maybe, or calculation. If we do this, you follow my instructions exactly. No improvisation, no heroics. I can't protect you if you decide to get creative. I don't need your protection. I need answers and evidence that clears my name. You need both, he corrected. And whether you want to admit it or not, you're in this now. Duyon made sure of that when he used your signature. He moved back to his desk and pulled out what looked like a business card, except the surface was blank. Keep this with you at all times. If you're in danger, break it in half. My people will find you within 10 minutes. Betha took the card, feeling the unusual weight of it. Some kind of tracking device embedded in the material, probably. What now? Now we confirm a few things. Jae-rin pressed the button on his desk phone. Send him in. The door opened and one of the bodyguards entered, carrying a tablet. He handed it to Jae-rin without a word and left just as silently. Jae-rin tapped the screen a few times, then turned it toward Betha. These are security feeds from cameras near your restaurant. Watch. The footage was grainy, time-stamped from 3 nights ago. Betha watched her own street, empty at 2 a.m. Then a figure appeared, moving quickly but not running. He approached Ezetable's door, slid something underneath it, and disappeared back the way he came. The whole interaction took less than 30 seconds. That's when you receive the invoice, Jae-rin said. Can you see his face? Not from this angle, but watch his hand. Jae-rin rewound and zoomed in. The figure's left hand was visible for just a moment as he bent down. A silver ring glinted on his middle finger, distinctive in its design. Some kind of emblem Betha couldn't quite make out. Do-hyun wore that ring constantly, Jae-rin explained. Custom-made, a gift from his wife before she died. He never took it off. The evidence was circumstantial but damning. Betha felt sick looking at it, watching the moment her life began unraveling and not knowing it. Why would he be so careless, leaving his ring visible? Arrogance. He thinks he's smarter than everyone, that the small details don't matter because the big picture is so convincing. Jae-rin set the tablet aside. It's why he'll lose. You sound certain. I am. People who rely on cleverness instead of thoroughness always make mistakes eventually. We just need to find the rest of his mistakes before the police find you. He checked his watch. Expensive. Swiss. The kind that cost more than some cars. It's late. My driver will take you home. Tomorrow, go to your restaurant and operate normally. Don't mention any of this to anyone, including your waitress. Act like nothing happened beyond the explosion everyone already knows about. You want me to just cook and serve food while I'm being framed? I want you to give Do-hyun no reason to suspect you're investigating him. Let him think his plan is working. Meanwhile, I'll have people looking into his activities, tracking his movements, finding out who he's working with. Jae-rin walked her toward the door. And Mrs., be careful. Do-hyun chose you because he thought you were weak. Easy to eliminate. Prove him wrong. Don't be afraid. Be angry. This is not the end. It's the beginning. We'll shatter this illusion like a bullet through glass. But don't prove him right about you being a threat until we're ready to move. They walked back down the hushed corridor, into the elevator, up through the parking garage. The car was waiting, engine running, warm air fogging from the exhaust. Betha climbed into the back seat, exhausted suddenly, the adrenaline that had kept her sharp beginning to fade into bone-deep weariness. One more thing, Jae-rin said through the open door. Check your restaurant tomorrow. Look for anything that seems out of place, any sign someone's been inside. Do-hyun may have planted more evidence to use later. The possibility sent ice down Betha's spine. He has keys? He doesn't need keys. He has skills. Jae-rin stepped back. Don't be afraid. Be angry. Fear makes you small. Anger makes you sharp. The door closed and the car pulled away, leaving Jae-rin standing in the concrete shadows of his underground kingdom. Betha watched him disappear through the rear window. This strange man who'd entered her life like a bullet through glass, sudden, violent, changing everything about the shape of what remained. To drive back to her apartment took 20 minutes through empty streets. Snow had stopped falling, but the cold remained, making the city look frozen in time. Betha's mind churned through everything she'd learned, trying to organize information into something coherent. Do-hyun, former employee, betrayed his boss, used her restaurant as a weapon. The logic was sound but felt incomplete, like she was reading a book with pages missing. What else was there? What wasn't Jae-rin telling her? The car stopped outside her building, a modest structure in Yongsan-gu, nothing fancy, but clean and reasonably priced. The bodyguard driver didn't speak, just waited for her to exit. Betha climbed out, her legs stiff from sitting, her mind still racing. "Miss Easy," the driver said, his first words of the night. His Korean was accented, North maybe, or Chinese. "Be careful tomorrow. Watch the shadows, not the lights." Then the car pulled away, leaving her alone on the sidewalk with cryptic advice and more questions than she'd started with. Betha climbed the stairs to her third-floor apartment, unlocked the 3 separate locks she'd installed herself, and stepped into the small space she'd made home. One room that served as bedroom, living room, and office. A tiny kitchen where she tested recipes. A bathroom barely big enough to turn around in. It wasn't much, but it was hers, earned with her own work. She locked the door behind her, checked the window latches, and only then allowed herself to collapse onto her bed, still fully clothed. The ceiling stared back at her, water-stained and imperfect. Somewhere in this city, Do-hyun was sleeping soundly, confident his plan was working. Somewhere else, Jae-rin was probably still awake, moving pieces on a chessboard she was only beginning to see. And here she was, a chef from Lagos who just wanted to cook food that made people happy, now caught between powerful men playing dangerous games. Betha's phone buzzed, unknown number. She considered ignoring it, but something made her look. "Check your back door tomorrow, carefully. I Lee, Kang, Jae-rin, using a burner phone probably, untraceable." Betha deleted the message immediately, paranoia whispering that Do-hyun might somehow access her phone records. She lay there in the darkness, listening to Seoul breathe outside her window. The city sounded peaceful, oblivious. Tomorrow, she'd go to ease a table and search for whatever trap Do-hyun had left waiting. Tomorrow, she'd smile at customers and cook food and pretend her world wasn't burning down. But tonight, just for these few hours, Betha let herself feel the full weight of fear and fury tangled together in her chest. Let herself admit that she was terrified, exhausted, and so angry she could taste it like metal on her tongue. Do-hyun had made a mistake when he chose her. Not because she was strong or brave or any of the things heroes were supposed to be, but because she'd already lost everything once before when she left Nigeria. She'd already rebuilt from nothing. And she'd be damned if some bitter, vindictive man was going to take away what she'd built a second time. Outside, Seoul slept on, unaware that in a tiny apartment in Yongsan-gu, a woman was plotting her own kind of revenge. Not violent, not explosive, just thorough. The kind that came from someone who understood that the best dishes required patience, craft, and time. The time to let everything simmer and meld together till the flavors were perfect. She'd already lost her recipe once, and she'd be damned if she'd let it happen again. No, she would take control. She'd make sure no one ruined what she'd painstakingly created. She'd already gotten through the worst. She'd already rebuilt from nothing. And she'd burn him instead. Precise timing and the willingness to turn up the heat at exactly the right moment. Do-hyun had started this fire. Betha Eze was going to make sure it burned him instead. My love, if you felt that shift with Betha, hit subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. This fight is just getting started. And more Afro-Korean stories like this right here on the channel. Part 2 drops soon. Don't miss it.